In this episode, we are going to talk about Kenya Air Force. The special emphasis is on the change of names. The change of names. The Kenya Air Force started off as Kenya Police Air Wing. It later changed its name to Kenya Air Force. It also later changed its name to 82 Air Force. But later on, it reverted the name to the name Kenya Air Force. How did all these things started? We cannot talk about those four changes without including the history of Kenya, especially the political history of Kenya. We will start with the idea was birthed by Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. It was birthed by Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. If you remember very well, the Air Force, Kenya Air Force, states that it was formed in 1964. So Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was the prime minister he was a prime minister. Kenya, we have had prime ministers under different definitions. If you go to other countries, since time immemorial, they'll say that the functions of a prime minister is this and that. But in Kenya, we have had the functions of prime minister being very different. So we are talking of Jomo Kenyatta's tenure as the prime minister of Kenya between December 12th, 1963 and December 12th, 1964. If you look at it, December 12th, 1963, it shows that those are 2 weeks or 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to 1964. So in 2 to 3 weeks, he could not do anything. But somewhere in 1964 is when he decided to have a Kenya Air Force. But as I said, that the rank of prime minister has changed their definition in Kenya several times. So, under the powers that he had as the prime minister of Kenya between 12th December 1963 and 12th December 1964, it meant that he was the head of government, but the Queen Elizabeth Regina II, was the head of state, and she had appointed a general to be the commander-in-chief. So, a decision to not just start a wing of the armed forces, like the Navy, like the Air Force, even specialized units within the armed forces. The Prime Minister Jomo Kenyatta had no powers to form even a commando squad within the army. The person who was tasked with that power was a general appointed by the British monarch, who was called the Commander-in-Chief of King's African Rifles in East Africa. So let us start with this. The Prime Minister in Kenya has changed their definition or their job description for as many times as it has appeared. Let me start this way. Between 1961 and 1963, June 1st, 1963, the Prime Minister in Kenya was called Chief Minister. Chief Minister. I remember Ronald Ngala was a chief minister. So in 1963, June, 1st June to 1963, 12th December, then the position of chief minister was changed by name, and it was renamed prime minister. Now, Ronald Ngala was the chief minister of the colony of Kenya. Between 1963, 1st June and 12th December 1963, for a period of 6 months, 1 week, or is it 11 days, the position was changed from chief minister Kenya colony to prime minister Kenya colony. That is 1st June 1963 to December 19. The name was Prime Minister Kenya colony. 1963 to 1963, December 12th to December 12th, 1964, the position changed from Prime Minister Kenya colony, it became Prime Minister of the state of Kenya. Prime Minister of the state of Kenya. Remember, it is not yet Republic of Kenya. Then on 12th December 1964, 12th December 1964, Kenya became a republic. Kenya became a republic under the president, and we did not have the position of prime minister. That is why every 12th December we celebrate both Kenya becoming independent, and we also celebrate Kenya becoming a republic. That is why it is called Republican Day, Jamhuri Day. Siku Kenya ilikuwa jamhuri. Now, the powers of Jomo Kenyatta after Kenya became a republic was he was the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Kenya, which today is called Kenya Defense Forces. But before, let us say starting from up to ending on 11th December 1964, the commander-in-chief was a British general who was answerable to London, and he was called the commander-in-chief of the King's African Rifles in East Africa. Of course, other countries, when they got independence and started getting off, they started their own armed forces. But the last station of his was in Kenya, where he was the commander-in-chief of the King's African Rifles of the colony of Kenya. Now, for even the then prime minister, okay, let us talk about prime ministers before we go to that. Then we had another prime minister in the 2007 government. The prime minister then was Raila Amolo Odinga. It was decided that Kenya had nobody knew who won the election. It was a bit hard to determine because both sides stole the elections. Pwagu na pwaguzi. But since Kibaki had been sworn in as the president and commander-in-chief, there was no other changes. And I remember Uganda, there was a presidency where there were 3 members of the presidency. But in Kenya, the position of the president can be occupied by only one individual, and the position of head of state can only be occupied by that very same individual. The position of commander-in-chief can still be will still be demanded by. So they said that the only thing they can share is being they have to share half when it comes to head of government. Head of government. So being head of government, they had to share. But head of state, commander in chief, presidential standard, that is the other definition of Raila as a prime minister. Now, whether he was in effect the half head of government, I'll tell you that this video is not a political video. It is a disciplined video, and we will not talk about that. Lastly, we have the Prime Cabinet Secretary, who is a cabinet secretary like others, but is one among equals. That is the chameleon changing position of Prime Minister in Kenya. Let us now go back. Between 1st June 1963 and 12th December 1963, a period of 6 months and 11 days, where Jomo Kenyatta was the Prime Minister of the colony of Kenya. The head of state in Kenya was the Queen, Elizabeth Regina II, and she was represented by a Governor General. She was represented by a Governor General. Now, this Governor General was different from the governor of the colony. I don't know, I haven't checked, but in many cases, he was the last governor before they got Kenya, before a country became independent, whatever country it is. But now he was a Governor General. First of all, Governor General is senior in rank to governor, but their job description was different. Assuming it is the same person, of which most likely it is, the governor on December 11th, the governor of Kenya colony on the 11th December 1963 used to be under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he used to be like under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Commonwealth Affairs. It was today the ministry is called in London. It is called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Commonwealth Affairs. But those days, it used to be Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Colony and Colonies. So any instructions like the governor wanted to call the state of emergency in 1952, state of emergency in 1952, he had to seek permission from the Department of Colony Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Britain. Now, he ceases being the governor under the Department of Colony, and he becomes a Governor General under the executive arm of the Queen. This one is there in New Zealand. This is there in Jamaica. This is there in Australia. The governor, it is an independent country, and even Canada. Maybe I'm repeating Canada. The Canada Governor General represents King Charles. He represents King Charles. So anything anything he wants to do, he has to get instructions from Birmingham Palace. So back to Kenya, between December 12, 1963 and December 12, 1964, Kenya was like Canada. Kenya was like Australia. Kenya was like New Zealand, independent country. But of course, in Kenya, the Governor General came from, you know, with the due respect, hatukuwa na masomo sana. But you'll find that the Governor General of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada are Canadian, such things. But his performance of duty is that he's answerable. You see, what can I say? The King Charles now is the King of Canada. He's the King of Australia. Yeah, that is what I wanted to say. So between 12th December 1963 and 12th December 1964, Queen Elizabeth Regina II was the Queen of Kenya. And since she was not staying in Kenya, she was not staying in Canada and Australia and whatever. She was being represented by a Governor General. But this Governor General was not the commander in chief of the King's African Rifles. There was a general who was the commander in chief of the King's African Rifle, East African Division. They had a very big camp in Kahawa. So when they left, half of the camp was turned into Kahawa Garrison, or nowadays Kahawa Barracks, and the other half was converted into Kenyatta College for the Form 5 and 6. Later it became Kenyatta College for the diploma course. Later it became Kenyatta University College, which was the school or faculty of education of Nairobi University. Later it became Kenyatta University. Now, back to that period. I want us to go to that special period between 12th December 1963 and 12th December 1964. As I said, 12th December, just is it less 19 days later, 19 days later, it was already in 1964. So you cannot enter an office and in 19 days you make a decision. So it was somewhere in 1964 that Jomo Kenyatta decided to have a Kenya Air Force. He decided to have a Kenya Air Force. But look at his powers then. Look at the powers of Jomo Kenyatta before 12 December 1964. Jomo Kenyatta, his rank and the job description was as follows. Jomo Kenyatta was the Prime Minister of an independent state, not republic, because 1964 December is when it became a republic. So he was the Prime Minister of an independent state of Kenya, whose head of state was the Queen, and there was a British general who was the commander-in-chief of the King's African Rifles, Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta reasoned that if he was to go and see and get permission, you see, even this general who was the commander-in-chief of the King's African Rifle in Kenya, even if in his capacity as commander-in-chief authorized for the beginning of Kenya Air Force, he had to seek for permission from the Minister for Defense in England, and the Queen, and so on and so forth. So to cut the long story short of Jomo Kenyatta going there asking whatever, and having somebody else decide something to you, it is very embarrassing. Let me give you an example. Have you been very broke? Very broke. And you don't need a lot of money, you just need 500 shillings. Then you go to your best friend and pour all your problems. You pour all your problems so that your friend gives you the 500. I mean, your friend gives you that small amount of money. You go tell him everything and whatever. Then your friend says, I understand, but I'm as broke as you are. You leave that place disappointed because he now knows your secret, but he has not given you the money. The same with Jomo Kenyatta. He could pour out his whatever, talk everything, but at the end of the day, the commander-in-chief, the general, would have rejected the formation of the Air Force. So what trick did Jomo Kenyatta do? What Kenyatta did as the prime minister, he pretended that he wanted to expand the police air wing. We had the police air wing from a long time ago. But this is the trick that Jomo Kenyatta did. The police air wing that we had before independence was like what we now have, the Kenya National Police Reservist. These are people, especially Europeans, who had their own personal planes, who would use the police plane, who would use their own personal planes for operation, especially the Mau Mau. So Jomo Kenyatta said, why don't we have a fully fledged police air wing? I don't know whether these things are still there in Kiganjo, but in 1982, that is how many years after independence? 20. We were shown classrooms and even badges of rank or whatever, which was the classroom of the Kenya Air Force cadet. Now, let me give, I know many of my viewers are police officers from Kiganjo. I've gone through Kiganjo. If you look at junior training wing, you go to the commandant's office, across from the dais towards the main gate, there used to be a classroom that was used by the Kenya Air Force. It was kept like a sort of a museum where Kenya Air Force started. They were about 12, so 12 being in one room is okay. They started their classrooms there, and funny enough, the 12 knew that they were going to start an Air Force. I would say that those people who knew could not reach 30. The 12th one, Jomo Kenyatta and others and others. Of course, the commandant Kiganjo knew. So they started their classes that time there in Kiganjo. And it was under pretext. They also put on police uniform under pretext that they were going to be, their police air wing was going to be started. Then, when Kenya attained independence, Kenya attained independence in 1963. When Kenya attained republic, I will repeat, when Kenya attained republic in 1964, 12 December 1964, Kenya attained the republic. the Prime Minister of the state of Kenya. Now, these are the points I want to pass it to you. One, on 11th December 1964, Kenya was a state of Kenya. The following day, Kenya became the Republic of Kenya. On 11th December 1964, Kenya was a state of Kenya, with the Queen as the head of state, with a Mzungu, a general, as the commander-in-chief, and with Mzee Jomo Kenyatta as the prime minister. That was 11th December 1964. 12th December 1964, the following day, vindu vichenjanga. Jomo Kenyatta was the president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Kenya. The Mzungu general, who was the commander-in-chief of the King's African Rifles Kenya, ceased to be, and Mzee Jomo Kenyatta became the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Kenya and the president. So, in his capacity as the commander-in-chief, if you are to meet people who are in the military, if you are to meet people who used to be in the military, they'll tell you that they almost always worship the commander-in-chief. Almost always worship the commander-in-chief. I've used a strong word, but I wanted you to understand. So, on 11th December 1964, the commander-in-chief was a British general, and who was, I think the British general was called Hardy. He is the person who wanted to hand over power to Jaramogi Oginga at Kahawa Barracks. We will not talk about that today. So, on 11th December 1964, the commander-in-chief of the King's African Rifles Kenya previously was a brigadier, but now he was a major general, Hardy. The following day of the Kenyan state, the following day, Kenya ceased being a state, or Kenya continued being a state, but it was added another title. The following day, Kenya became a state and Republic of Kenya. The Jomo Kenyatta became the president of Kenya. He became the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Now, when he became the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, he had to seek for permission from nobody. In fact, those days, today, the commander-in-chief of the Kenya Defense Forces has some limited powers, which I think he has to seek for permission from the legislative arm. Or if he takes action immediately, then he is compelled that in future, within I think 6 weeks, 6 months, he has to bring the issue to the parliament. But we are talking of that time. We are talking of that time. So Jomo Kenyatta becoming the president, he declared that the thing that was going to be the police air wing, he pretended that it was an afterthought. He said it was going to be converted and made, it was going to be converted and made the Kenya Airforce. Now, Kenya, that is 1964, and that is why the Kenya Air Force always says that it started in 1964. The day, I think maybe that was his first executive order, or between I'll do research, but I think between December 12th and December 31st, Jomo declared that the Kenya Armed Forces will have both the Kenya Navy and the Kenya Air Force. The members of the Kenya Air Force from 1964 and the members of the Kenya Navy from 1964 continued using the British ranks. They continued using the British ranks. And I remember the commander of the Air Force was somebody who was called Wing Commander, a British fellow. But when he handed over power to a Kenyan, they put on the same ranks, but the Kenyan officer who took over in 1968 was Lieutenant Colonel James Kimaru. Now, around 1968, the then Chief of the Defense Forces, Major General Joseph Ndolo, was it Joseph? But he was called Ndolo, decreed that both the Kenya Air Force and the Kenya Navy adapt the ranks of the Kenya Army. So, things like flight lieutenant, things like wing commander, things like commodores, air commodore and commodore, things such as fleet commander were replaced by army ranks like captain, major, colonel, and so on, and brigadier. So I said the first commander was Lieutenant Colonel Kimaru. He took over around 1968. And it is around that time, just before he took over, the CDF then, the head of the army, the military used to be called CDF. The CDF then was Major General Ndolo. He decreed that they will all use the naming of the. Now you know why in Kenya we don't have Air Commodore, we don't have Air Marshal, we don't have what do you call Admiral and Fleet Admiral or such thing. It is Ndolo who between 1968 and 69 ordered that they continue using that. Now you know. But they continued. The Navy and the Air Force started putting on the badges. They continued putting the badges of rank of the British Army and the British Air Force, but then named their officers in the army ranks. Instead of, instead of you calling Moi Air Boys commander, calling him what do you call wing commander or something like that, or flight lieutenant, they were now given the army ranks names. But whatever they were putting on, whatever the Navy was putting on, and whatever the Air Force was putting on, they were putting on the British type of badges of rank. To date, to the day I'm recording this, the Kenya Navy still puts on the badges of rank of the British Army, but use the Kenya Army ranks. That is why you find that the boss at Mutongwe Army is called Brigadier. The head of Manda Island is also a Brigadier. The head of the Navy is a Major General. That is why you have such things in the Navy. In the Army, in the Air Force, they use the Army ranks like the Navy, but they put on the Army ranks. If you look at the Kenya Kenya Air Force officer, he puts on the same badges of rank like that one of a Kenya Army. And they of course they use the name, the ranks of the Kenya Army. Now, how did it come? It came around in 1982. It came around in 1982, where there was where there was a military coup attempt. So after the military coup attempt, the military coup attempt was made by members of the Kenya Air Force. That is a story for another day, but I've recorded several concerning the military coup. I've even recorded several concerning Mahmoud Mohammed. But then, after the 1982 coup attempt, the then Deputy Army Commander, Major General Mohammed Mahmoud, in Garissa, he is known as Maendeleo, he was transferred to the Air Force to start a new Air Force, which was renamed 82 Air Force. 82 Air Force. He replaced Karaoke. He replaced Karaoke, and Karaoke was even arrested and taken to court martial. When he went there, it is him who said that the Air Force, at that time, just before the coup attempt, the Air Force was putting on British Air Force badges of rank, but they used to call themselves the Kenya Army ranks. Instead of being called Commodore, Air Commodore, he would be called Major General, but he would put on the ranks of an Air Commodore. So, Mahmoud, coming out of the army and becoming the head of the Air Force, he decreed, it was him, as I said, that Major General Ndolo said that military people, the Navy and Air Force, should cease using the ranks, the names of the ranks of the British Army. But General Mahmoud decreed that the Air Force start putting on badges similar to the Army, badges similar to the Kenya Army. So it is General Mahmoud who came there. He never put on those strips of the airmen. He just put on the Army Army badges of rank. Things like military pattern stars. They started putting on that time. And how did they revert to the name Kenya Air Force? Because we have seen after the 82 coup attempt, they changed their name to 82 Air Force. How did they come to revert back to the name Kenya Air Force as they are being called at the time of recording of this video? There is somebody who is called, when we talk about cases, we put names there. For example, when people talk about hanging, death sentence, they talk of Murwatetu. You see, Murwatetu is connected to the constitution interpretation of that, isn't it? Chief Inspector AP Murwatetu. Now, when we talk about 82, about the Air Force, we talk of Geoffrey Murungi. Talk of Geoffrey Murungi, a namesake to Keraito. So, he's the one who caused the, there are those who cause things directly, like as we have seen, there are those who cause things directly. Like Ndolo just said, okay, we start with Jomo Kenyatta, who said, now the police air wing is going to be Kenya Air Force. Okay, we go to Ndolo, who says, okay, Navy and Air Force, you don't use the Commodores and Admirals and Air Marshal. Then we have people who do, and then Mahmoud said, we are going to have ranks similar to those ones of the army. Geoffrey Murungi did it in a roundabout way. He did it in a roundabout way. He joined the 82 Air Force as a commissioned officer. He he must have been a trained accountant. He must have been a trained accountant. Then on 4th March 1993, he was court-martialed by 82 Air Force for the theft of public funds when he served Moi Air Base as the base paymaster. Those joining discipline services would be shocked. When I was a constable, we used to line up and you be paid and you sign on a ledger book. So, him being the base paymaster, he stole some soldier's salary. He stole some soldier's salary. And you know how much does a soldier get and whatever? That is a secret. So if he has to be taken to an open court, such things would be said. And so he was court-martialed by 82 Air Force for the theft of for the public funds when he was the paymaster at Moi Air Base. Captain Murungi challenged the jurisdiction of the court-martial. He said the court-martial had no jurisdiction. He said that according to the Armed Forces Act, the court-martial had authority to try personnel of Kenya Army, Kenya Air Force, and Kenya Navy. And he was an officer of the 82 Air Force. There is no place where in the Armed Forces Act where he said court-martial. Okay, I've not seen that act and whatever. And you see the acts have been changed. AP Act, Kenya Police Act both have been changed. It is now National Police Service Act. Armed Forces Act has been changed. It is now Kenya Defense Forces Act, such things. So if you have to study those things, you have to go to the archives and see the law as it was that time. So what did he was employed when he joined the military as a cadet. His commissioning came that he was commissioned as a second lieutenant of the 82 Air Force. He was later promoted to full lieutenant of the 82 Air Force. And when he stole the salary of the servicemen, he was a captain of the 82 Air Force. So he was being taken to court. He was being taken to martial court, charged under the Armed Forces Act. And he said, the Armed Forces Act said, that time, the Armed Forces Act then said that they have powers to charge. For example, if you are a police officer, you cannot be charged there. Although there are some certain examples where if you jointly commit, let's say you are a civilian and you want to overthrow the government, or you are a civilian and you agree with him to steal money or steal things from there. There are provisions where non-members of the armed forces can be charged in court martial, and this one happens when, I think it was also recent in Uganda. They are still having the Kinabisije case. But in many cases, in almost all cases, or we can just say all cases, is that the Armed Forces Act then and the KDF Act today states that members of the Kenya Army, members of the Kenya Air Force, and members of the Kenya Navy can be tried in a martial court. Yet they were trying him, a member of the 82 Air Force. they continued the case. He appealed. He appealed to the High Court of Kenya. He appealed to the High Court of Kenya, and the High Court of Kenya agreed with him. The High Court of Kenya agreed with him that his commissioning letter indicated that he was a member of 82 Air Force, and 82 Air Force was not part of the Kenya Armed Forces. So, and yet again, Kenya Armed, the Marshal Court applied to members of the Kenya Air Force, no, Kenya Armed Forces. And who are the members of the Kenya Armed Forces? It was the Kenya Army, Kenya Air Force, and Kenya Navy. So 82 Air Force was a stranger in the case, so he cannot be charged in a court martial. You see, these are some of the problems of a dictatorship, and that is why in today's constitution we have things that we call public participation. We call something called public participation. There was no public participation there, even though I also see what these days public participation, people try to delay cases and that, or they were not involved or anything. Maybe public participation should only involve people who are experts in that field. But anyway, that is the challenges of a country ruled by a dictator. Apparently, in a haste to rename the Kenya Air Force to 82 Air Force, they forgot to amend the then Armed Forces Act. The High Court ruled that 82 Air Force did not exist in law, and Kenya Air Force had not been deleted from the act. According to the to the High Court, is that somehow, in the theory or something, because when the president or the government banned or outlawed or whatever you call it, the 82, the Air Force, Kenya Air Force, they should have gone to the law books and replaced Kenya Air Force with 82 Air Force. They did not. So on paper and in law, Kenya Air Force still existed. But at that time, it existed without personnel, without anything. And it was said that 82 Air Force was just a foreign body that had borrowed personnel from Kenya Air Force. Actually, it had looted all the personnel from Kenya Air Force, and so Kenya Air Force still continued. This is the case that made the 82 Air Force revert back to Kenya Air Force. I want to give an example, the nearest example I can think of. The nearest example I can think of, when I was working for Special Branch, we had a department. Yeah, we had the Special Branch. Even initially, Special Branch was a department in the CID. Then it became a formation like CID. Then it was removed from from the police in 1968 and placed in the office of the president. This was that the Special Branch was a department within the office of the president run by police officers. All of them, okay, police officers plus civilians, of course. But let me talk of the technical people, police officers. So everybody, starting from director to the rookie in the Special Branch, were police officers who were seconded there. We were not under the Commission of Police, but we were police officers borrowed by Harambee House. That is the same thing that was being seen by 82. 82 Air Force was just created there, where it borrowed personnel from Kenya Air Force. And so it did not exist, and the High Court ordered that since it did not exist by law, then all personnel should go revert back to the Kenya Air Force. That's all for the long story. Have a nice time.